Preach the word.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I'm glad to report minimal bloodshed from the holiday gift swap last night. We managed to keep even temperaments. Good times were had by all. It's an important thing to have when having a gift exchange. My grandmother years ago used to host a similar Christmas party where all the extended family would get together, and I'm going to say you guys are a lot more polite than they were at times. But the good news is my immediate family had 5 of us, so we were able to coordinate like really easily. We could like just move gifts around from family member to family member and just lock them down. I wanted to talk this morning about a lot of different things. We're going to be in Romans chapter 8 for the entirety of the lesson today. So there you go, no fuss, no muss. We're not doing a lot of running around. We're just sticking in Romans chapter 8, and that's where we're going to be today. The first thing I want to talk about is trust, and also how this podium is probably about a couple of feet closer than it needs to be. No offense. Just a spacing thing. It's just how I feel comfortable. The first thing I wanted to talk about is the idea of trust, and how this is a trusting people in this congregation, because you guys know for a fact that I was at Star Wars on Thursday, and yet you still gave me a microphone, and I could just stand up here and spout spoilers all day long. But I'm not, because that's what trust is all about. Go see it, good movie. But seriously, looking in Romans chapter 8, we're looking at what it means to separate ourselves from the world and connect ourselves to God. What it means to really put aside the ways of the world, to kind of put ourselves in a different mindset, in a different realm, as it were. And that started with what was the scripture reading from this morning, the first 4 verses, talking about what we have with Christ. Continuing on with that, we have to ask ourselves, where do we as people put our trust? Are we trusting in the law of man, or are we trusting in the law of God? Now, the thing about the law of man is, technically, in theory, it's something that should work. We put people in charge. Those people are in charge to govern us, to make sure we do okay. Now, technically, on paper, that sounds like a really great idea. But the problem is, once you introduce mankind into any element, it immediately becomes flawed, because we as a people are flawed. And that's a really kind of bummer way for me to start off today by telling you that you're flawed as people. But that's also saying that I am flawed as a person as well. So congratulations, we're all kind of in this together. And it's one of those things where we have to realize that putting our trust in the world, putting our trust in the laws of man and the ways of the world is not going to benefit us in the long term. So the first question I want to ask is, where is our mind? Where is our mindset? Where are we mentally as a people? So looking at verse 5, those who live according to the flesh have their mind set on what the flesh desires. But those who live in accordance with the Spirit have their minds set on what the Spirit desires. So the first thing we have to ask ourselves when separating ourselves from the way the world is where are we mentally as people in this world? Where are we? What is our mind on? Is our mind on the desires of the flesh, or is our mind on the desire of the Spirit? Now, obviously, we want to be with the Spirit. That's the kind of just textbook, technical, easy answer. But getting there is tricky, because it requires you to tune out the noise that's around you every single day. It's one of those things that I had a little bit of time to kill yesterday, and so, like the brave soul that I am, I decided to go to the mall. Because, I don't check my calendar. I don't know what day it is. It's not like it's a week before Christmas or anything, right? And getting in there, I am a creature of habit and routine. I work the same Monday to Friday hours. I interact with the same group of friends. My life week to week is very similar. And from time to time, I inject myself into society, And I have to remind myself that, wow, there are a lot of people on this planet. And if you want that object lesson, go to the mall. Because I just got in there and I forgot what being around people is like. Because the company I work for, the branch has 25 people. And the friends I interact with are probably maybe a dozen or so. And so to go where there are thousands and thousands and thousands of people, it is jarring to say the least. But it is also a reminder that there's a lot of people out there, and there's a lot of different things going on with different people in different places in their lives, people accomplishing different goals, and just being around that. And it makes for a good illustration of what it is to tune out that noise. The idea that, for many of you, you may interact with way more people than I do from week to week. And so it's harder for us to kind of mentally tune out that noise and really focus on what the Spirit desires. Because what mankind desires, what the flesh desires, that's easy to find. Turn on a television, listen to a radio, look up at a billboard, look up in the sky. There's probably skywriting or something. Because there's always something telling you what you want, but not what you need. And, that's advertisements. If I see an ad for, a cola beverage, hey, that might work on me, But it's one of those things where we get so consumed, especially in this time of year, especially in this culture, what Roy was talking about, how sometimes we run the danger of kind of skewing off of what Christmas is supposed to be about, and we kind of wind up on this track of looking at the material angle of it and becoming so focused and consumed and obsessed with it that we kind of lose our footing. And so one of the reasons why Christmas is my favorite holiday is because it's one of the last bastions of society where we as a country just kind of decide, okay, we're done for today. We're done. We're just going to shut it down for a whole day. It's one of the only days out of the year that almost everybody just kind of shuts down and stops and breathes and listens. And Christmas Eve is my all-time absolute favorite time of year because there is nothing you can do on Christmas Eve except exist and be at home and focus and be with the ones you love. And it's such a great time of year, and it's such a great opportunity to revisit what the Spirit wants. So we take time, whether it's on Christmas Eve or whether it's weekly or daily, we take time out to kind of help ourselves calibrate. Calibration is a good word for this. Calibrate the desires of the Spirit, to sit down, to study the Word, to read passages like this out of Romans and really think about what the Spirit wants. But then we have to accept the fact that continuing on in verses 9 and 10, you, however, are not in the realm of the flesh, but are in the realm of the Spirit, if indeed the Spirit of God lives in you. And if anyone does not have the Spirit of Christ, they do not belong to Christ. But if Christ is in you, then even though your body is subject to death because of sin, the Spirit gives you life because of righteousness. And that's going to be an important section to revisit here in a minute, talking about the idea of changing realms. The idea that most people live in the realm of the world as it is. They accept the limitations of their body, and when that's done, and that's the life that they've accepted, and that's all they've got going for them. The idea that no matter how good or how bad it is right now, that's pretty much what you've got. And then when you're done, you're done. But what this passage is talking about kind of transcending that realm and not being in the realm of the flesh, but being in the realm of the Spirit. And talking about how, through the gift that Christ has given us, even though our bodies are subject to death, there's nothing we can do about that. Our bodies are temporary. And even though, from our perspective, life seems life seems long, impossibly long at times, it is still a temporary life that we lead. And that one day our bodies will die, but because of who we are, because we have decided to live within the realm of the Spirit, because we have decided to give ourselves over to Christ, because of that righteousness, because of that gift of life that is given to us, there is something beyond that. And those who don't live with that, those who accept the fact that once they're done, that's not how that works. That's not one of those things where there is life beyond this for good and bad. And it's one of those things that we have decided to elect to not live in the realm of the flesh, to separate ourselves from that, so that we can be liberated by the gift that Christ has given us. This next section is especially important. Jumping down to verses 22 through 25. We know that the whole creation has been groaning as in pains of childbirth right up to the present time. Not only so, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption to sonship, the redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we are saved. But hope that is seen is no hope at all. Who hopes for what they already have? But if we hope for what we do not yet have, we wait for it patiently. This is an important section because, and I kind of glanced over this section, but it also talks about the idea of how the pain that we go through here is not comparable to the joy that we are going to have when we're done from this world. Now I'm going to ask us to participate in a very brief exercise, and I'm going to apologize in advance for this. I'm going to ask you guys to just close your eyes. We're going to focus on something for a minute. So if you're willing to participate, just close your eyes, and I want you to picture, and I apologize in advance, we're just going to spend a minute there. I want you to picture the worst day you've ever had. Just very briefly, don't spend too long there, but just very briefly touch on that for just the briefest of seconds, and then come back and open your eyes. Just touch on for a second, and then come back. The suffering that we go through is not comparable to the joy that we have in the gift that is coming for us. That brief moment that you reconnect with what the worst thing you've ever gone through it is, whatever it is, financial hardships, the death of a loved one, whatever it may be, that pain is temporary. And it is also mathematically minute, meaning there's not a percentage that it can compare to the joy that is waiting for us. And the only way that we can kind of, sort of understand that, because we as people are limited in our scope of imagination. We can't fathom God's total plan. We can't grasp it, but we can relate to it in the best way that we can. And the only way I know how to do that is to picture the worst thing that's ever happened to you and then invert that feeling. The notion that the sufferings that we go through as people are not comparable to what God has waiting for us. So the idea of taking that negative feeling and then flipping it and realizing that, because even saying, think of the best day you've ever had, that's not comparable either. That's one of those things where that's not even comparable in the same way. And so it's one of those things where we wait eagerly and patiently, and it's frustrating at times because we recognize the world as a flawed place because we as people are running it. And it's frustrating at times. It's frustrating at times because we know what's coming over the horizon. We know what's going to happen. I joke about ruining movie spoilers up here, but the kind of greatest spoiler of all is knowing how the story ends. The idea that we possess this knowledge because we have opted into it. The idea that we can study the scriptures and recognize that this is what is coming. And that seems like a way bigger spoiler than something from Star Wars, just, saying. But it's good that we possess that knowledge because we know that that is what is going to anchor us. We know that is what is going to connect us to that purpose and that goal, is the knowledge that we just have to hold on and recognize that we just have to do the best that we can according to God's will. Jumping down to the last section here, looking at just the tail end of the chapter, in the section marked More Than Conquerors. What then shall we say in response to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? I should say just very briefly that I looked at this last section and I was trying to organize Romans 8 into a kind of coherent narrative. But when I got to the end of the section, I literally just grabbed every verse out of the section because I kept saying, no, that's relevant, no, that's relevant, no, that's relevant. And so it's important that when we look at this, I've got down until verse 36 here. What then shall we say in response to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also, along with him, graciously give us all things? Who will bring any charge against those whom God has chosen? It is God who justifies. Who then is the one who condemns? No one. Christ Jesus, who died, more than that, who was raised to life, is at the right hand of God and is also interceding for us. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall trouble or hardship or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword? As it is written, for your sake we face death all day long. We are considered as sheep to be slaughtered. And it's one of those things where you look at that and you look at the connection that Christ has for us. Christ is there for our benefit. He is there on our behalf. Because you could take the greatest lawyers in the world, you could take the greatest clergy, you could take the greatest politicians, you could take the greatest people, and you could have them go on your behalf and plead and spin tails and make deals and wheel and deal and all those things. And they're not going to be able to do it. There's only one person who could do that, and that was Christ, who could make this sacrifice for us. I love the tail end of Romans chapter 8. I love the line, if God is for us, who can be against us? Because it's just establishing a real firm line in the sand right there. It's just saying, hey, this is where we're at as followers of Christ. We have given ourselves over to this sacrifice. We have given ourselves over to this gift freely so that we do not have to fight this battle on our own. I love that middle section where it talks about the things in the world that surround us, because it kind of covers everything in the briefest of sections, where it talks about shall trouble or hardship or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword. Talking about the idea of these are the things that we as people are going to go through our lives. We at times are going to be hungry. We at times are going to be in danger. We at times are going to have hardship. We at times are going to be persecuted. And none of these things are relevant to the power that God has through the sacrifice of his Son. It is God who justifies. Who then is the one who condemns? No one. Because you're kind of at the top of the ladder at that point. You've got a food chain, as it were. And then you reach the top of the food chain, and you've got God. And you kind of look up the food chain, and there's nobody else up there. And so it is because of that aids us when we go back to the original questions. When we talk about how do we mentally calibrate ourselves to think in the way the Spirit wants us to think, how do we put ourselves out of the realm of flesh and into the realm of the Spirit? Well, we do that with the knowledge that the hardships that we face are eventually going to come to an end. We do that through the knowledge that there is a God with infinite love and infinite possibility for us, who sacrificed his own son so that we could be forgiven of our sins. And that helps us establish the fact that life is temporary. That the life that we have here, this is just kind of like a blip on the radar. We think about all the great accomplishments of human history. We think of all the philosophers and engineers and scientists and politicians and whatever else it may be that have come before us. And for all their accomplishments and for what we have as a society today, those people are gone from this world, as we will one day too. But that's not supposed to be depressing for us. That's not supposed to be the downer note of today. It's supposed to be the encouraging note of today, to recognize that there will be a time one day where suffering will stop. Where one day the suffering that we have as people, the world that we live in, that will one day go away, and all there will be peace. And it's one of those things where I do often think about those bad times in my life, and I do think about how I got through them, and how I got through them not through my own effort, but from the encouragement of others, and through prayer and understanding, and realizing that this is all temporary. And I believe I say this every year, but this is my mantra this time of year. My company is getting ready to come up on our year-end inventory. It's the 3 worst days of my life for work. And my mantra is, this is all temporary, and at some point this is going to end and we will be past it. But in those moments, it's often hard to think of that. So you have to start now with that mentality. You have to start now, today, when things are all right. You have to condition yourself and study and pray and build up that encouragement, so that when those difficult times come, when you're faced with it, you can at least have it aided by this knowledge that these things are temporary. And that's not me just blanket saying, okay, well, we're all followers of Christ and you're going through a bad time, so calm down and stop crying, or whatever it is. Like, I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying that take the encouragement that is there to ease your pain and suffering, and that will help you recognize that. Because we all go through bad times. We all yell and scream and cry and get frustrated and get flustered. Except for me, I've never been flustered before. I've got everything under control all the time, and things are cool. Thanks for asking. But it is one of those things that we recognize, if God is for us, who can be against us? And I love that, because it's just one of those mantras that we can just keep coming back to time and time again. And there's stuff like this all over the Old Testament and the New Testament. And there are all sorts of verses and passages and chapters and books and letters talking about the awesome power that God has. And as it is written, for your sake we face death all day long. We are considered as sheep to be slaughtered. And it's one of those things where we recognize what Christ has gone through. We recognize that every Lord's Day when we have the communion, and every week the gentlemen who come up here and speak bring refreshing new spins to it. It's the same story over and over and over again. And that can only be done through the power which Christ has given us. The idea that we come up here every Sunday and we share the same meal, we break the same bread, and we drink from the same cup, but there's something new to be learned each and every week as people. Going back to the top of the section, it talks about how we are more than conquerors. That we are more than that because of what Christ has established for us. And it's important as we get into this time of year, and as we get into any time of year really, to stop and recognize and to really understand what is going on. And I think this is a good prelude to the Christmas holiday, the idea that we recognize that through Christ we are more than conquerors. And it's important that because we as a body of believers, we gather together every single week and we study and we worship. But this is the time of year that the world especially turns to the story of the birth of Christ. And it is one of those things where it's important to stop and reflect and reaffirm our faith and to reconnect with that in the ways that we can, to spread that message to those that we care about most. And so if you're here today and you're not part of that body of believers, that opportunity is available as it is always. This church strives to make that opportunity available at each and every turn, to give yourself over to the waters of baptism, to be buried so that your sins can be forgiven. And that's one thing I'm especially proud of with this congregation, that we strive to have that ready each and every week. If you're here today and you're part of that body of believers and you just need to reconnect with this message, if you need prayers of encouragement, if you need whatever your need is, we as a body will do what we can to address those needs. But as we break for the end of service and the beginning of class today, just take the time to recognize that we are more than conquerors, and that is not through our efforts, but that is through the efforts of the sacrifice that Christ has made for each and every one of us. And I ask that you meditate on these things as we stand and sing the song of invitation.
I once was lost in sin, but Jesus took me in. And